Hello, my name is B.Mock. I'm the General Manager for the Global 3T MRI segment for GE Healthcare. And today I'm going to be talking about GE Healthcare's technology development process, where we bring new innovation and ideas to commercial reality. But first, I thought I'd start with just a brief GE Healthcare overview. GE Healthcare is comprised of 4 different business units. The first is imaging, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So that's MR, CT, molecular imaging, and X-ray. We then have ultrasound, which covers women's health, cardiovascular, general radiology, and point of care. We also have life care solutions, which is really monitoring anesthesia and respiratory care, including diagnostic cardiology and maternal infant care. And finally, we have enterprise digital solutions, which is our PAC and HISRIS business, as well as advanced visualization. GE Healthcare employs about 50,000 employees worldwide, and we have operate in over 160 countries, and we invest more than $1 billion in cash annually in research and development. So innovation is extremely important to us. We play in a global market that's about $47 billion. And the nice thing about this market is that there are healthy growth rates, regardless of what business unit we're talking about, anywhere from 2 to 6%. But to capture that growth over this period, we really need great innovative ideas from folks like yourselves. GE Healthcare was founded upon a philosophy of innovation and a legacy of innovation. Our founder is Thomas Edison, probably one of the most well-known inventors in history. But while we love to innovate, we really need to partner with clinical experts and educators and discoverers to build the right tools to solve the right problems to improve healthcare for all. As an example of those partnerships, in MR, we develop a lot of technology through academic partnerships. We have over 1,000 ongoing MR research collaborations globally. It covers clinical applications and workflow, MR hardware such as coils and gradients, and visualization and post-processing software. A great example is our SignalWorks set of applications, where we've developed new clinical tools that meet unmet clinical needs with a lot of collaboration partners. These are applications that span across the body, so neuro, musculoskeletal, cardiac, body, as you see here. One of our latest innovations, Air Recon DL, is at the bottom. That's a technology where we have a deep learning reconstruction that improves image quality and also reduces scan time by up to 34 to 40%. And you can see that just the number of clinical partners that were involved in the development and analogy of that technology before we moved it into commercialization. So how do we commercialize these types of applications and technologies? Well, it starts with GE's 2-step product development process. First, it starts with a funnel of ideas. Those ideas then enter into our advanced technology development process known as ATD. That ATD process can take anywhere from 9 to 36 months. And during that process, we're really just trying to answer a couple of questions. Is it feasible and can we make it? And finally, will customers actually value it? Once that's complete, we then move into the new product introduction process, or NPI process. This is a process that can take anywhere from 9 to 18 months. So we know we can make it, we believe that customers will value it, and now it's just time to take it through the regulatory and quality pathways to produce a final commercial product. So we'll look at each one of these processes in a little bit more detail. Along the way, we're going to ask some questions. The first question is really, who is the customer and what problem is being solved? Are we solving problems for the radiologist, the technologist, or the administrator? Who is the end user and what persona interacts with the technology the most? What problem does it solve? What's the benefit versus the cost? And how often is that problem encountered? That really kind of helps define the total opportunity. And finally, will customers be reimbursed or save time, resources, or money with the new invention? We often bucketize these into 3 distinct groups. Whether the innovation improves clinical workflow and efficiency, does it solve an unmet clinical need or solve a clinical problem? Or does it improve technology access and or reduce overall costs? We start with the advanced technology development process. This is a process that is designed to identify technological and clinical risks, as well as establish customer value. We leverage milestones that mimic the TRL process that some of you may be familiar with, and we leverage technical reviews to address those risks prior to the commercialization steps. Each new ATD project is reviewed on an annual basis. We start with the T0 milestone, that's project definition, where we have goals and high-level requirements that we need to meet, as well as assessing what risks are involved. At the T1 milestone, that was where our project scope is defined, feasibility is complete, and we've identified the resources needed to complete the project. We then move on to the T2 milestone. That's where we've actually built a prototype. We know the build requirements and we know the functionality has been verified. And then we move to a very important step in the process where we ask ourselves a question, and that's, do we need to evaluate the technology externally? We call that the TE milestone for external evaluation. That's where we will establish a plan. We will define the number of customers that we want to go to, and we will get this into the hands of customers to determine whether the technology is actually useful in a standard setting. That process is almost always followed when we go through the ATD. It's extremely important. Once that's complete and we know the value of the technology, we'll move to T3, and that's where we've defined that the technology is really, ready for inclusion into a commercial product. So the entire goal here is just to take that idea or concept through initial prototyping and through user testing. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this TE milestone, the external clinical evaluation. As I mentioned, it's almost always necessary. We never really skip this. A TE milestone is something that can take 8 to 12 weeks externally. We'll identify collaborators, maybe 10 to 15 sites with different personas, academics, outpatient imaging centers, large IDNs, community hospitals, to get a very broad view of the technology. And then we'll create evaluation contracts, protocols, and develop those with sites. We'll determine if it needs to be sponsored or investigator-sponsored research, whether it's paid or unpaid, the number of cases, the data we're required to prove value, and we'll get usability feedback. Does it work, and how can it work better? Again, all in an attempt to really prove that customer value and minimize risks when we get to the commercialization phase. So the next phase is the new product introduction phase, or NPI. This process takes established technologies and applies the regulatory and quality process rigor to create a medical device that meets the needs of customers. We have similar milestones to the ATD process. We have the M0 milestone, where we have a program definition, and during this milestone, we'll actually create a business case to define what that market opportunity is, what are the target markets, what are the unmet customer needs, etc. We'll move on to the M1 phase, where program scope is defined, feasibility is complete, and what configurations are supported. Are we going to do this at 1.5 or 3T or both? And then what resources are required and the regulatory registrations are required for this particular device. We'll then ask ourselves that exact same question about, do we need an external evaluation? And if we do, we'll go on to what we call an ME, which is a milestone for external evaluation. Very similar to the TE and ATD, we'll identify 10, 15 sites. We'll put that technology into the hands of users and ask for feedback to make sure that it's meeting the intended uses. Once that's complete, we can move on to our MS milestone. That's where we do commercial announcement for promoting and actually taking orders for the device. This does require regulatory approval in a lot of different countries, particularly the US with 510K. But once that's complete, we'll then take it through the manufacturing process to get to our M3 milestone, where it's finally ready for full commercial release for shipment to customers, delivery, and install. So again, the goal of this process is really to deliver a cleared medical device that meets its intended use cases to the market. There's just a couple of key considerations I want to go through before I close. The first one is regulatory considerations. we serve over 110 countries globally. And there's a lot of registrations that we do to serve all 110 of those countries. In fact, we have to translate the operator manual into 33 different languages. In fact, we translate it into Estonian because we have MR systems in Estonia, believe it or not. Many countries have regulatory bodies and registration requirements that are quite different. We have the FDA in the US, we have MHLW in Japan, NMPA in China, and MDR and CE mark rules in EU, just to name a few. Often this requires clinical data and studies that may be required for clearances. And the regulatory bodies often require a wide variety of documentation. It's often different between them. And it can take quite a bit of time to get clearance, sometimes over a year in certain countries. An example is the 510K for the FDA. This assumes that a suitable predicate device exists in the market. We submit 510Ks during the GE NPI cycle. We are required to provide design input, output, verification, and validation evidence to prove or support that our claims are valid for what we intend the device to do. We may need to perform clinical studies of non-inferiority if we're going to compare one device to a previous device or a predicate device. Those traditional 510Ks have a 90-day response time where the FDA is required to respond to our application within the first 90 days, but they can ask clarifying questions, which basically resets that clock. So it's not always guaranteed that clearance will be granted within 90 days. And during this period and before this period, there's no promotion or sales may be made prior to clearance of the medical device's intended use claims. That can only happen after 510K clearance is achieved. Next is licensing. A few considerations here. GE really has 3 or 4 types of licensing. They're listed here. First, there's exclusive licensing. This is where we will negotiate an exclusive royalty-bearing license where only GE can use the technology and commercialize it, and we will pay a royalty for that. That means that no other device manufacturer can use that technology. It's exclusive to GE. Non-exclusive means that GE can use and commercialize it, but you may go to other OEMs and also negotiate license terms with them. Then there's the non-exclusive royalty-free license. This is where we will pay an upfront fee for the rights. So there's no royalty, ongoing royalty, but it's an upfront fee. And then we can use the technology and commercialize it. And you may do this with other OEMs as well. It's non-exclusive. The fourth one that's listed just below that is an evaluation license or a trial license. We will often work with inventors to negotiate a trial license. This is for that initial customer feedback, those TE milestones, where we would like to leverage the device, but we're going to put it in the hands of just a few evaluators for them to basically use the technology and help us establish that value and determine market acceptance via that external evaluation. All of our license fees, we've got to balance that against the market's ability to pay for the technology, as these fees always add to overall product costs. And one thing to note is that GE requires that these be in place before the MPI program starts, that M0 milestone that I had on a slide previously. And that's to ensure that that business case that we have to develop is as accurate as possible. So in summary, the way we take new innovative ideas from outside and bring them in is through GE's ATD and MPI development processes. And these are designed, again, just to minimize the technological as well as market and customer value risks to ensure that the adoption of this new technology is going to be commercially successful. We often require external evidence as part of this external evaluation so that we know the technology is worth licensing and the regulatory investment is worth it for commercial dissemination. And finally, that regulatory and commercial licensing that I just talked about needs to be considered very early on in the process to ensure that there's an expedient dissemination of the technology once we want to get that into market. And just in closing, I'll say that, look, we're a company of innovation. We're always looking for new technology and new innovations to create efficient and improved and personalized healthcare services. So just in one final word, who to contact? You can contact any one of us that you know at GE, or this is just a generic way. So gehealthcare.com, about us, contact us. You can leave a message and we can get back to you with how to proceed through any one of these mechanisms that I just described. So thank you for your attention.